Who's ready to catch some fish through the ice? So, we're out here ice fishing right now, and things kind of slowed down, so we thought we'd do another how-to video. In this video, I think we'll go over rules and regs. We'll talk about setups. I'll show you guys my tackle box. We'll also talk about where to go to fish, locations, as well as when to fish. So, starting with rules and regs, once again, we are in Idaho ice fishing right now. Idaho's ice fishing regs are pretty lax, but generally, you'll always want to check the body of water you're going to go fish first. Be up to date with the regs. Idaho, you're allowed to have 5 lines out per person. So if you're running tip-ups, which we'll get into tip-ups later, but if you're running tip-ups, you could have 5 tip-ups out, or if you want to fish with a rod in your hand, you can have 4 tip-ups out, 1 rod in your hand. Yeah, so kind of keep rules and regs short, but check out rules and regs before you go fishing, as always. But setups. So there's many different setups for ice fishing. You could be using a tip-up, you could be using jaw jackers, or you could be fishing with a good old ice rod. And what you use is a jig or lure or bait. Kind of depends on what you're targeting. Currently we are targeting either perch or other panfish. So we are both using a tungsten jig with just tungsten jig with a little maggot on it. I don't know if that'll focus. If not, I'll put a picture up. But I have this it's basically a little tungsten weight with a chain down to a little treble hook. And I have a maggot on each one of those trebles. Destiny is fishing with a Chikai tungsten jig, which I'll have somewhere in this video. But yeah. Now, if you were targeting a trout or just larger fish, you might want to upsize a bit. There's a variety of baits you could be using with a tungsten jig. You don't have to use maggots. You could be using worms, mealworms. I have a can of maggots. They come in puck just like that. Or mealworms. We've mostly been catching some itty bitty teeny tiny little perch today, so we've been sticking to maggots and little tungsten jigs. If I was fishing specifically for trout, I'd probably put on a spoon with a worm on it. But yeah, so that's kind of our setups. We are both using some fairly light rods. This is a Abu Garcia. I think this is a Veritas with a Maverick reel on it. Max Ice reel. But this is the combo. You want to just hand me. And then we have, this is a Beaver Dam glass noodle with a Abu Garcia, I think, what is this reel? Accucast reel on it. But these Beaver Dam glass noodles are really awesome. They're super, super sensitive. And with panfish, you want something that has a really sensitive tip. So you can easily tell those bites. Especially with perch, because perch bite super soft. Like, you want to be able to feel that. The reason I'm not using my glass noodle right now is quite fond of my little Abu, and it's got a little more of a backbone to it than those glass noodles do, so I can actually get a good hook set. But you kind of want to, change your reel for what change your rod for what you're fishing. If I was fishing specifically for trout, I would be using my Ugly Stick. It's a Ugly Stick GX2. I have quite a few of them, and this is the ice fishing combo. Definitely a bit beefier, stouter. I have used it for perch. It's just a little harder to feel when you get a bite on it, but for trout, it works great. I also have a whole bunch of other rods out in the sled, but these are the 3 main ones I would, grab first. But yeah, so those are our rods and reels and kind of the setup. Would you hand me my tackle box? Now to show you guys my tackle box. I just have this little box, and this is about all I take with me ice fishing, for the most part. Unless I'm targeting pike or bass specifically. But this I got some, that side's full of tungstens, and this has some tungsten spoons. And tungsten. The reason we use tungsten is kind of want, when you're using a really small jig or spoon, you want it to sink fast, and plus, like, if you're on some super slushy ice, it just goes through a lot faster and a lot, since tungsten's way denser than lead, tungsten sinks faster. Yeah, that's rods, reels, and kind of a quick look at my tackle box. Here in a little bit, we might step outside and go through just basically everything you need to get started with ice fishing. We'll show you tip-ups and a jaw jacker, or automatic hook setter, which you basically just put your rod in, and when a fish pulls on that, it trips a little lever that your rod basically sets itself. But yeah, other things that would be nice to have: a shack. This is an Eskimo 2-man shack, works great for the 2 of us. You also would want, you really don't need, but having some form of an electronic helps. You know, a fish finder, depth finder, or even an underwater camera. We currently have both set up, and here in a second I'll detach the camera and show you guys. But a fish finder is pretty important. First of all, it lets you know how deep you're fishing, and also if you put it in the traditional or the flasher mode, you can see when those fish are coming up from the bottom. Panfish, like perch, or even smallmouth bass will be clinging to that bottom, so it really, really helps to see them come up. Otherwise, you're just pounding on the bottom hoping for something to happen. But yeah, here, let me guys show you what we got set up. So over here we got, down here we got the Markham Recon underwater camera. I have it set up with the camera facing this way so we can see all 3 holes. I will say underwater cameras are a bit of a pain in the butt, since unless you have some form of a panner, you kind of got to twist that cord around until it's looking right, and then pack it down with some slush. But then my fish finder I use, this is the Garmin Striker 4. It is one of the cheapest fish finders out there. Oh, come on, focus. But yeah, it's honestly wonderful. I think for just the screen with the boat setup, it was $70, and I've converted that to this little power box, and then I bought the ice fishing transducer for it, and I think the ice fishing transducer was about as much as the entire setup was, so they are a little spendy. For almost 2 years, I just used the regular transducer mounted to some PVC, so if you want to stay in that budget option, I might make a video on how to do that, as well as this is just a little ammo can with a battery in it and a little bit of wiring. But if you guys want more information on that, I could post a video too. Other things that make ice fishing a little more homey and luxurious: a good old buddy heater. Definitely keeps you warm, especially when you're standing on frozen ice all day. Well, I think that kind of covers the basics, but here in a little bit, I will pop a hole for you, show you the auger I use, kind of how to look at the fish finder, as well as setting up a tip up and setting up a jaw jacker. But we'll see you guys in a sec. Alrighty, so we're just outside the shack, about to pop a hole for you guys. I have my handy ice auger right here. It's an Eskimo. It's I think this is the 6-inch. Typically you want, most ice augers are 6-inch, 8-inch, or 10-inch. 10-inch would be great, but for drilling through by hand, a 10-inch is a lot to be cutting through that ice, so the 6-inch pops right through, and that's what I prefer to use. If I was fishing for a much larger fish, I'd definitely be using a bigger auger, but y'all can watch me drill this hole, and it will not be pretty, so I'm gonna fast forward that. Alright, so that was fun. Now that we're through, usually I'd take a ladle and scoop out the slush, but I left that in the shack, so I'm just do this the ice auger way, so you can just kind of plunge all that slush out like so, kick it down a little bit so So it's kind of flat for our tip up to lay down on. So I have a pretty beat up tip up right here, but basically there should be a flag there. So your tip up is just kind of a spool, and on the spool I have a double hook set up. If you're not using, a heavy bait or a jig, I like to put a weight on there, and this is like 40-pound ice braid down to just some 12-pound monofilament. That's like a 1/4 ounce weight. And I got 2 hooks on there with worms. I think these are like, they're probably a size 4 hook. I usually set up tip ups on this lake for targeting trout. Perch might come by and steal them, but so I keep it fairly high in the water column. So if you don't know how deep you are, you kind of just got to spool that tip up out until you hit bottom. And depending on what you're fishing for, if you counted how many you're going, you can, either come up just one pole, or say it's 17 feet and you want to be mid-water column. You say each pole is about 3 feet, you'd probably go down 3 or 4 poles and keep it mid-water column. But yeah, so when you're setting a tip up, you just kind of pull that out, and once you know which way it's spinning, so it's going to pull that way when a fish grabs it. So I like to have this way this tip up's going to spin toward the back, and depending on what you're fishing for something that's going to hit hard, you can set it so it's not going to trip so easy, like so. But if it's something that's going to maybe just barely take it, I like to set it pretty loose so it can pull real easy. Basically, something pulls that, flag goes up, that you got a fish on. All right, so that's that, but I'm going to set this automatic hook setter in that hole instead. So we got our automatic hook setter here. There's a name brand called Jawjacker. This is a Celsius, a lot cheaper, works just as good. So you got your legs that go over the hole, and then you have this mouth. I don't know what you would call this, but the end piece here that holds your line. So your rod sticks in like so, and then I have, hopefully you guys can see this, just a little piece of braid tied in a loop that goes, so I have a spoon on this, but pretty much the same as letting out your tip up. You let your line out to where you want it to be, and then you bend this rod down and you stick this little piece of braid right on that little lever, maybe. All right, anyhow, I'm going to do it and then show you guys. All right. So basically there's that little lever in there that you put that on, and then this comes around and holds that in place. Then you take your line and you set it on this lever. When a fish comes, boom, it's hooked. So yeah, that's drilling a hole and a tip up and a Jawjacker style setup. We'll meet you back in the shack to talk about where to fish and when to fish. See you guys in a sec. Well, now that you've seen, how to drill a hole, how to set a tip up, and how to set a Jawjacker, let's talk about where to fish. So if you're fishing a body of water that you're familiar with and there's good structure, you should probably, target that. Perch tend to hang out near rocky faces, or even a dead tree that's underwater or something like that, some form of structure. You really want to look for that. If you're fishing for trout, stock trout in particular, it really doesn't matter as long as you're kind of in a central path for them as they do their route, their route around the lake. But generally, the fish aren't really going to be where you find them in the summer. For example, you know, like if you're catching bluegill and crappie in the shallows in the middle of summer, you don't really want to fish shallow. You want crappie and bluegill will both go to the deepest part of the lake and hang out because the warmer water. Perch, though, they hang out around the bottom pretty much year round. So like in the winter, you want to find some form of structure that they're going to be hanging out around, or like vegetation. Like if you're in the middle of a lake and you find a weird patch of grass that's not near the bank, it's probably a good place to start. But crappie, bluegill, and some other panfish, they're going to suspend mid-water column during the winter, and it's really difficult to find them. You pretty much want to look for some of the deepest places on that lake that you're going to be fishing, or pond, and just kind of pop some holes, hop around. Once you find fish, then, set up. But, for example, today, we went to a spot that I thought was good, but my waypoint may have been off a little bit, so I ended up bouncing around doing some hole hopping. I just got a big bite. We got a good sized perch down there right now, but anyhow, yeah, so kind of bounce around, hole hop till you find them. And then if you're getting fish repeatedly, you can set up shop. If it dies out, you might as well go pop some more holes and try again. We're going to keep trying to catch some perch, though. I'll talk about when to fish here in a second. All right, so that one didn't bite. But when to fish. If there's ice, you should be fishing it. But especially like perch and probably even trout and other panfish, they're morning and night are good times. For example, when we first got here around 7:30? Around 7:30 when the sun was starting to rise, we caught a bunch of little fish and a few decent ones back to back. Throughout the midday, it kind of dulls down. But also, like, before or after a good thunderstorm is a good time, or like snowstorm or something. Changes in barometric pressure kind of mess up that fish activity. And I'm not really an expert to say whether it's good to go before a storm or after, but when there's a change in that pressure, usually there'll be some sort of event where the fish will start feeding more. But yeah, we're going to keep fishing. I might splice in some of that, but if I don't, we might talk a little bit about ice safety in another video. Probably won't get to that in this one, but before you go out on the ice, I just want to say, check it. Just because other people are out there doesn't mean it's safe. So, Destiny just missed a fish. But, get out there, go catch some fish on the ice, and if you like this video, please give us a thumbs up. If you want to see more specific content, leave a comment. If you didn't like this video, leave a comment, and all I gotta say is get out there, go catch some fish, and go find out.